Hello, and I'm wishing you a freilich and happy Purim. You know, when you think about the overarching story of what really the message of Purim is about, it's really about a message of theodicy, of trying to find the good in times of great travail. Historians tell us that the Jewish people experienced an immense sense of cognitive dissonance after the temple was destroyed. We were promised by Hashem that we were the chosen people, that we were only going to ascend higher and higher. And then all of a sudden the temple is destroyed. We're exiled from our land. Where is the utopia that we were all striving and headed towards? And then all of a sudden tragedy strikes with the advent of Haman, of this Amalekite of Persia. And things seem to be totally lost. And then we're able to find redemption amidst the darkness. Purim is the story of being able to reconcile how there can be a future even amidst the darkness of tragedy. You know, there's a hymn that we recite after we say the Megillah. It's the famous Shoshanas Yaakov. And there's a line in the Shoshanas Yaakov, the rose of Jacob, which is what we're called. We're so delicate sometimes, like a rose among thorns, but somehow we manage to persevere from generation to generation. And it says about the story of Purim, Shuasam hayisa lanetzach, v'sikvasam b'chol dor vador. That God, you've been the salvation of the Jewish people through this Purim episode eternally. And the hope endures from generation to generation. But the question is that really true? Does the Purim miracle, does the Purim salvation represent an eternal salvation? Of course not. There have been many iterations of Haman since Haman. There have been Hitlers, there have been pogroms, there have been massacres, Rachmana litzlan. So how can we say, Shuatam hayita lanetzach, that this was an eternal salvation? It wasn't an eternal salvation. It was a temporary salvation. The Avnei Nezer explains that when we think about what Amalek represents, Amalek in Kabbalistic works represents the das of Klippa. It represents the intellect of that which is the undesirable discard, the impurity that is within this world. What Amalek reminds us of is the same thing that every Jew is always supposed to remember. How distant am I from the Ribono Shel Olam? How far is the great gap between myself and the divine? There's a positive aspect to that awareness, but there's a negative aspect to that awareness as well. Moshe Rabbeinu had the positive aspect of that awareness. He said, I cannot possibly approach the holy. I cannot possibly approach Hashem until He calls to me. Vayikra el Moshe. I have to wait for Hashem to call to me because I know that I am impossibly distant from the divine. And it leads to humility. It leads to a sense of gratitude, of inadequacy, and yet great love and embrace when Hashem finally does call to us. But Amalek reminds us not only of our inadequacy, but of the complete impossibility of ever bridging that chasm. They tell us, it's like the Torah says, Asher korcha baderech. They completely cooled you off to the whole prospect of having a relationship with the divine. They said all is lost. They said you'll never make it. That is why the Talmud asks the question, where do we find a reference of Esther in the Torah? And the Gemara answers it's based on what it says at the very end of Deuteronomy. The Anochi, Haster, Astir, Panai, Bayom Hahu. I will hide my face from the Jewish people. When does God hide His face from us? When we say the words that are immediately before that pasuk. Al asher ein Elokai b'kirbi mitzauni haraos ha'ela. God is not in my midst, and that is why I am suffering. When a Jew ever says God is not in my midst, it is a sign that he has fallen victim to Amalek. The very first Amalekite war happened right after the Jewish people said, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im ayin, is God in our midst or not? And then immediately afterwards, Vayavo Amalek. We instigate the coming of Amalek when we express that despair, that sense of giving up, that God is not with me. And therefore Esther comes onto the scene at a time when the Jewish people experienced exile, destruction, but most importantly, they experienced the despair and giving up. What the story of Purim reminded us is that no matter how dark the days become, no matter how distant we may feel that we are from Hashem, Hashem is still always with us. A Jew can never say, is God with me or not? I may have sinned, but that gives me the opportunity to do tshuva, and God will accept my tshuva. But if I feel that God is completely departed from anything remotely close to me, then that's actually even worse than the sin itself. It leads to a complete sense of shutting down, of not trying anymore, of not trying to reach that elusive divinity. And that's what it means in the hymn, Shuasam Hayisal Anetzach V'Sikvasam B'chol Dor V'Dor. After having experienced that such devastating blow of the destruction of the temple and in the advent of Amalek, when we were able to emerge on the other end as a victorious people, we also emerged as a people with a hope for the future, that there will be times of darkness, but we can always emerge from those times and always believe that God will be with us no matter how dark those days become. That is the eternal victory of Purim. Not the physical security of the Jewish people, but the mental security of knowing that no matter how dark those days are, there always will be a tomorrow, will be a hope for the future. And thankfully, that is what has sustained the Jewish people from generation to generation, even into our own lifetimes. That after a Shoah, people could pick up the pieces and still have hope for the future. It is that hope that started from the story of Purim and stays with us to this day. So my dear friends, if there's one thing that you can take from Purim is, never give up hope. Always place your trust in Hashem. No matter how distant things may seem, tomorrow will be a better day. A Freilichen Purim.